plenty of tricks out there. I don't think you can go too far. About 40 minutes, 35 minutes, and you had all you wanted. That's not going to work. Just go on.
Everyone, we're going to get started. Thanks again for coming. Really appreciate your time, especially in this crazy weather. Really excited to kick this off and get started with, I think, our best speaker we've ever had. We've talked a lot about this. First of all, I want to thank our sponsors who makes this happen every time. Really want to show our appreciation to the Barbecue and great supporters, Whitley Penn, Delaware Square Ranch, 171 Ranch, and Summit Financial. You guys have been phenomenal sponsors. So appreciative of you making this happen. Our purpose, to dive a little bit deeper, is really trying to engage in that same feeling you have whenever you're out in the outdoors. Being you finally have an opportunity to get away, you enjoy a nice, hunting or fishing trip, and you enjoy some people and just that fellowship after that hunting or fishing excursion. Enjoying some good food, some drinks, just enjoying that positive feeling. That's really what we're trying to recreate, and in doing so, giving back to conservation as we continue to build. And looking more at that opportunity to continue to scale, we've had a phenomenal group of leaders teach us and really get us better understanding of the way to scale this. Our board of directors has been pivotal in finding a way to continue to scale this through up and down economies. These people have been phenomenal thought leaders. And if you have any interest in getting involved in something like this, would love to entertain the conversation, be it from a board of directors perspective, sponsorship, we'll talk about that later, or just coming more regularly and bringing people. Would love to have that conversation with you. And before I go too crazy, been so exciting to catch up with John over the course of the year. Just to give a little bit of a background about John, he is a New York Times best-selling author. He's written Imagine Heaven as well as a number of other books over his career of over 30 years, studying near-death experiences. From Austin, Texas, a family man, has an incredible passion for the outdoors as we all do here. Has been a part of a number of podcasts recently, including Sean Ryan's, Glenn Beck's, hosting upwards of almost 1 million people in a lot of different cases. So it's been really, really interesting. He's got a background as being a pastor as well in Central Texas. So it's been really enjoyable just getting to know him and getting to know his background. And again, his deep passion for the outdoors is one that's consistent. I will mention a couple of comments. Candidly, we rarely have someone that's not in the vocation of the outdoors. We have a lot of hunters, fishermen, that kind of thing. We had Jay Novacek, as you guys remember, in the past. Again, football player. This is another example where it's someone who's an author. Their vocation is not in the outdoors. And I find it intriguing that although we've had all these experiences, us, individually hunting, fishing, and we kind of enjoy it. The thing that I really thought was cool about John and talking about this idea that's again very different than what you guys usually hear from this pulpit is like it's like the elephant in the room when you're hunting and fishing. It's like you see something magical like I think Dale, we were on your trip and I'm sitting there and we're going pheasant hunting in the Dakotas. And then you see this giant body start moving. And then you see this buck, must have been like a 12-point run off in the distance. And no one saw it but me. Those little moments that are almost magical when you're sitting there in the outdoors, it's wild. And that's where I look back at a much larger purpose as to why we're here. And I think ultimately as we dive into a really, really deep conversation about what happens when you die, I think that's what's kind of the connectivity between what we talk about as kind of surface level stuff, like what we do when we're hunting or fishing, and really what we're doing here as a grand idea. So anyways, before I go too crazy and start crying here, I'll pass it to John so he can kind of give us a little more background there. But John, thanks so much for coming.
Yeah, so great to be here. Am I running this?
I think so, yeah, you should be good.
Well, tell me how.
Just that clicker on the right, you should be.
Still right?
Yeah, I think we're that.
Okay.
Is it green? Yeah, it should. There we go. Yep.
I do enjoy the outdoors. My dad grew up here in Texas. My dad would take me hunting, out in South Texas, Colorado trout fishing, and then we started sailing. And I really got into sailing. I raced sailboats for the University of Texas. There was us racing when one of my crew forgot and released the wrong line and almost took us over. And this is actually sailing a year ago, and see up where it says 1 and the little dot, that's me, and actually my friend Brad, who was with me, and that's Beryl turning to a Category 5 and trying to outrun it. And last year I went to Costa Rica surfing with another friend from here in Dallas, and came back with dengue fever. Anybody ever had that? So I love nature, but nature doesn't always love me. Okay. But I love the outdoors, and I tell you, if you do love the outdoors, there's probably been a time when you've looked around at just the beauty of it all, and you've just thought, wow, who do I thank? Or is there someone to thank? Or why do I love this so much? And is life just like, we just go through it, and we enjoy these moments and these things, and then unplug the computer and it's gone, dead? Or is there more? Is there more to it than just that? And that's what I want to talk about. I want to share with you my about 40 years of research. One night there were 3 guys who were sitting around late at night playing poker, and the conversation turned serious. And one of them said, "Hey, what do you want people to say about you at your funeral?" And the first guy said, "I want people to say that I was a brilliant surgeon who saved many lives." And the second guy said, "I want people to say that I was a devoted family man. I left a legacy through my children." And the third guy said, "I want people to say, look, he's moving." Now, believe it or not, more and more have said, look, he's moving. In 2019, the European Academy of Neurology reported on a study done across 35 countries. And what they found is that 5% of the population, when clinically dead, had what's called a near-death experience. We're talking about millions of people. That correlates with a Gallup poll of Americans, by the way, 1 out of 25 Americans. We're talking about 13 million Americans and people across 35 countries that have had what's come to be called a near-death experience. When their heart stops beating, their brain waves cease, and yet when they're resuscitated by modern medicine, or in some cases seems to be just miracle, but they come back talking about being more alive than they've ever been before in a place more real than this has been. Now, when I first heard these, I was actually an agnostic. I studied engineering at the University of Texas. Book of Mormon's good here. And I'm actually a Cowboys fan, so let's get going on that.
Good luck.
Yeah, not holding my breath.
Yeah.
Yes, imagine.
Touche. Touche.
Jack's imagining heaven, highest paid. No, we won't do it. Anyway, so I was an agnostic. I studied engineering at the University of Texas. I worked as an engineer, so that's the way my mind's always worked. Like, how do you know? How do the pieces fit? And I always ask that question, like, how do you know there's really a God? And people couldn't answer that question for me. And after a while, I just determined, the whole Jesus stuff, Jesus was a good man, probably made legend. God, you just can't know. There's no evidence. And then my dad was dying of cancer. And someone gave him the very first research on near-death experience, that coined the term near-death experience. I saw it on his bedside table. I picked it up and just started reading it, and I couldn't stop. And I read the whole thing in one night. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this might actually be the evidence I've been asking for. And so that opened my mind to start to seek. And because so many of the people in this book I read are talking about this God of light and love and heaven and Jesus, and I started reading the Bible. So it opened me up. I started reading the Bible. I came to faith. I ended up going from a career in engineering, 2 years later going into ministry and starting a church in Austin, Texas for skeptics like me. But I also, over the last 40 years, have studied close to 1,500 cases of near-death experience, personally interviewed many of them. And in 2015, I wrote a book called Imagine Heaven. And what I was trying to do is show that there are about 40 commonalities of this experience, by the way, all around the globe. And I was showing how they are what has been revealed in the Bible all along. They match, they correlate together. And then last year I wrote another book called Imagine the God of Heaven, showing how people from every continent, I interviewed about 70 people all around the world, every continent, every religious background, and yet they are experiencing this same God of light and love. And you'll hear from some of these people that I've brought with me today on the video screen as well. But let me say this as we're getting started. After interviewing so many of these people, here's what I think is going on. So imagine, we're living this three-dimensional experience, right? In one dimension of time. But imagine if we're living this life on a flat black and white painting, or on this flat black and white screen, all right? So we're two-dimensional. We have up and down and side to side, but we don't even have in or out. There's no such thing in our world. Okay, so death means separation, when your soul separates from your body. So imagine that death, that flat black and white image of a person is peeled off that, suddenly brought out into this three-dimensional space that was always there, all around you, but you had no conception of where it was. And now there's color and 3 dimensions of experience, and then imagine getting resuscitated, pressed back into the flat black and white world. And now you have to describe 3 dimensions of color, but in flat black and white 2-dimensional terms. How would you do it? And when I've talked to people having near-death experiences, and I've used this analogy, they've said, absolutely, that's it. It is an experience into another dimension. And so I want you to imagine what that might be like, because all of the things we love about life here, including the outdoors and the adventure of it all, maybe is not going to end here. In fact, I know it's not going to end here. And hopefully by the end of the night, you'll have that hope and confidence as well. So I want to let you hear from some of the people that I interviewed. And I want you to note something. These are doctors, they're commercial airline pilots, they're CEOs, they're bank presidents. They're people that have nothing to gain making up these crazy, wild stories of dying and experiencing this and coming back. And yet they say it was the most real thing that ever happened to them. We good?
Yeah, I think you just press the next. Yeah.
Dr. Mary Neal is an orthopedic surgeon who shares her medical practice and her love for outdoor adventure with her husband Bill. In 1999, they planned an adventure that took Mary on a spiritual journey few have taken and returned to talk about it.
My husband and I really enjoy kayaking. We enjoy traveling. We speak Spanish. We've traveled internationally a number of times. And so for my husband's birthday, I said, okay, this is the year we're going to do it. So we went to Chile for a vacation to kayak.
After a week of kayaking, Bill sat out the final day with a sore back. Mary and the rest of their group kayaked through a treacherous stretch of the river.
These are drops of 10 to 15 feet, 20 feet maybe, which for an experienced kayaker is not a crazy thing. I went over the main drop, and as I pressed it over the drop, I could see the tremendous turbulence and tremendous volume. And as I hit the bottom of the drop, the front end of my boat became pinned. I and my boat were immediately and completely submerged. I was absolutely pressed to the front deck of the boat. And I couldn't move my arms back far enough to reach my spray skirt, let alone push myself out. I very sincerely asked that God's will be done.
Dr. Neal was dead for 30 minutes.
Whoa.
Yes, and had eyewitnesses there who can testify to that. But did you hear what she said? I was more alive than I've ever been. So imagine that the point maybe we feared the most, that point when you end this life, is actually stepping into more life. And what they say is they leave their body, but they still have a body. They have a spiritual body. So they're out of their body, but in a new body, and they're still themselves. In fact, they feel more themselves than they've ever felt before, and more alive than they've ever felt before. And not just with 5 senses, some say it's more like having 50 senses, and even blended senses. So you're experiencing life on a whole new level. Now, why, though, should we even believe that these are true? And one of the first things that got my attention, because I started thinking, well, maybe these are just hallucination. Maybe it's the neurotransmitters flooding the brain. Maybe this is just brain-based. But there were some things that convinced me otherwise. 3 in particular I'm going to share with you during this presentation. The first one is, when people say they leave their body, oftentimes they are still in the room of their resuscitation, up above, watching what's happening. So when they are resuscitated, they can report things they should not have been able to see. They had no brain waves. Okay? One person I interviewed, a cardiologist, Dr. Michael Sabum, said that he set out actually to disprove near-death experiences. This is back, 40 plus years ago when I first started studying them as well. And he said, I didn't believe there was such a thing. And he set out to scientifically disprove them. But as he started interviewing his patients, he started hearing more and more of these testimonies. And here's what he said. He said, Pete, one of his patients, told me that he had left his body during his first cardiac arrest and had watched the resuscitation. When I asked him to tell me exactly what he saw, he described the resuscitation with such detail and accuracy, I could have later used the recording to teach physicians. So they were able to report things they shouldn't have. Sabum goes on to say, these people, like Pete Morton, saw details they could not have otherwise seen of the resuscitation. One patient even noticed the physician who failed to wear scuffs over his white shoes during open heart surgery. And after 5 years of study, he changed his mind and wrote a book on his findings and published an article in the Journal of the American Medical Association, which, by the way, there's now been about 900 scholarly articles published on near-death experiences and their validity. But he publishes this, and Dr. Jeffrey Long, a radiation oncologist, reads it in JAMA and says, that's not true. That couldn't be. And then he starts asking patients, and he ends up studying thousands of them. And here's what Dr. Long has concluded. By studying thousands of detailed accounts of NDEers, near-death experiences, I found the evidence that led to this astounding conclusion. NDEs provide such powerful scientific evidence that it's reasonable to accept the existence of an afterlife. And doctor after doctor after doctor who has looked at the evidence became convinced as well. Another doctor that I interviewed, Dr. Pim van Lommel, was a Dutch cardiologist who reported a case in the Lancet, Europe's most prestigious medical journal, of a guy who was brought into the ER from a park. He was found dead in a park of a heart attack, brought into the ER in the hospital in Holland. They went to shock his heart, but they wanted to intubate him first. The nurse found dentures, so took the dentures out, put them in the lower drawer of the crash cart. They intubated him, shocked his heart, got his heart going again. But he never came to in the ER, rolled him out to another room. A week later, he comes out of coma, and he's bothered that they've lost his dentures. And he keeps complaining, where are my dentures? And then he sees a nurse and he shouts, that nurse, get that nurse. That nurse knows where my dentures are. And then he explains that he was up above and in the ER, and he described the personnel, the doctors, the nurses, what they looked like, what they were wearing, and that was the nurse that took his dentures, put them in the lower drawer of the cart with all the bottles on it, and that's where they found his dentures. Now, you may say, oh, what a nice urban legend to pass along the internet, right? But there are hundreds and hundreds of stories like this of verifiable observations. Dr. Jan Holden is a professor of psychology, actually at North Texas State, or was at North Texas State. And she actually did a study on near-death experiences and their verifiable observations to scientifically look at what could be verified. And she interviewed about 100 patients, I think it was 93 or something like that, but about 100 patients. And what she found is that of their observations, and each one make multiple observations, but of all their observations that she could verify, 92% of their observations were completely accurate. Just stop and think about it. 92% of their observations of what was happening while they had no brain waves were accurate. Another 6% were mostly accurate, so maybe some details varied. Only 2% were inaccurate. That turned out to be one patient in the study. And if you have any other questions about that, or I got it wrong, you can ask her, because Dr. Jan Holden is actually here with us. And I'm so honored. I've been wanting to meet her for such a long time, and here she is. So, kind of cool. So she can answer all the questions I can't afterwards. But here's the deal. This is not a new phenomenon. You know, Plato actually wrote about a near-death experience in the Republic. The Apostle Paul in the Bible, I believe, actually had a near-death experience, or very likely. You know, it says in Acts chapter 14 that when Paul was in the city of Lystra, that he got stoned to death. Stoned to death with rocks. I'm from Austin. I always have to clarify that. Maybe that's clear in Dallas. You got to clarify it in Austin. And it says this: they stoned Paul, dragged him out of town, thinking he was dead. But as the believers gathered around him, he got up and went back into town. Okay? Now, they knew how to stone people to death back then. And the fact that he would get up and go back into town, that's not normal. Okay? But here's what's interesting, is he says this later in 2 Corinthians 12 of himself. He says, I was caught up to the third heaven 14 years ago. Was that 14 years ago back in Lystra? Possibly. Whether I was in my body or out of my body, I don't know. Only God knows. Why? Well, because we still have a body. We're still ourselves. But I know that I was caught up to paradise and heard things so astounding that cannot be expressed in words, things no human is allowed to tell. And so what we see with this, what we see with this is that we still are alive and we still have a body. And Paul later even writes about this in 1 Corinthians 15 when he says our bodies are buried in brokenness, but they're raised in glory. They're buried in weakness, but they're raised in strength. But the word is duname in Greek, which literally is the word we get dynamite from, in power. That's really a better translation. And that's exactly what near-death experiencers said. There is a new power of experience to this body, not 5 senses, but 50. They're buried as natural human bodies, but they're raised as spiritual bodies. So just think, when we die, you know, this is version 1.0, and it's deteriorating rapidly if you're in my age stage. But imagine we get an upgrade, version 2.0. And I think Jesus actually has version 3.0, but we can talk about that later. But here's the thing to understand. Life goes on, and we are ourselves, and we enjoy it. Just like we have enjoyed this. That is actually, I think, God's plan for us. And the truth is, so many people have such a horrible view of heaven, of the life to come. We think it's going to be this wispy, otherworldly, intangible kind of thing. No, it's going to be real. We think it's going to be an endless worship service. That sounds bad to me, and I was a pastor. All right? No, it's going to be life. And this is what Jesus said. It's life abundant. It's more life than this. So just imagine. So many near-death experiences actually told me that this life feels like the shadow, that life feels like the real thing. So imagine that. And by the way, the Bible even hints at this in Hebrews 8 when it says of the priest in the tabernacle. They serve in a system of worship that's only a copy, a shadow of the real one in heaven. So just imagine if all that we experience in this life that we love is really like just seeing your shadow compared to the real you. Imagine the beauty that we will one day experience in new dimensions. So after people leave their body, often see their resuscitation, they travel. And it's different. You know, you've probably heard the tunnel or the portal that opens up and they go through this portal to the light at the end. And there's been a lot of, stuff made about that. But that's not the only way. There are other ways that they travel, and they travel to a place. Again, it's in another dimensionality, I believe. But it's a place of exquisite beauty. And Paul also talks about this. He says, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has imagined what God has prepared for those who love him. But it was to us that God revealed these things by his Spirit. You know, when we enjoy the outdoors here in this world, we can either connect the dots or we can miss connecting the dots. Isaiah said he had this vision of heaven, and the angels said, holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. In other words, all the beauty and the wonders and the adventures and the enjoyment and the excitement, all of it is just a little taste of the wonders of the Creator, the glory of the Creator. And yet, this world is broken. There's something missing. We all know that. But the scripture, Paul talks about that too. He says, all creation is waiting eagerly for a future day when God will reveal who his children really are. Against its will, all creation was subjected to God's curse. But with eager hope, the creation looks forward to the day when it will join God's children in glorious freedom from death and decay. For we know that all creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. You know, it's like this world is so beautiful. There's so much good, but it also is laboring under disease and death and decay. And it's endless, right? And yet, there's a reason for that. And the reason is that we would be attracted to the beauty and the good and want that and more, and yet realize, but this is not the life we can hold on to. You can't. I mean, we all know that. We might deny it or ignore it, but you can't. And all these things, the decay and disease and death of this world, is a warning and a reminder. Hold on to what will last. Because it will be all of this and so much more. Watch as some of the people that I've interviewed talk about the beauty of heaven. Dean was a court supervisor who got, he had pancreatitis, and then it turned into sepsis. And he actually has hospital records when his heart stopped. He has hospital records showing his heart stopped for 1 hour and 45 minutes. And then he was resuscitated. Now listen to what he says. And then Captain Dale Black, who's a commercial airline pilot, has flown the world, but he was in a twin-engine plane crash in Burbank in Los Angeles. I've seen pictures in the LA Times of the wreckage. Nobody survived, but he came back to describe the beauty of this incredible place.
Things were more beautiful than I could ever imagine. It was past anything that I would believe that it would be like.
The colors are so alive that the most beautiful day on earth is just a reflection of those colors.
The greens are greener, the yellows, the golds, the blues, everything reminded me that earth is a reflection of heaven, but heaven is perfection.
So one of the common
So just think, all of the beauty and the outdoors we love here doesn't end. That's what near-death experiencers consistently tell us. And we will experience it together because heaven was meant for a relationship. You know, that's God's desire, that everybody would be there together with him and with each other. And you know what's interesting is people who have a near-death experience say often they have a welcoming committee that comes of people who had passed away before them, relatives and friends who will come to welcome them or greet them. Marv Beston is a bank president who died in a hospital in Michigan and then was resuscitated. He said he had this welcome party of friends and relatives. He said, both of my friends were prayer warriors. We'd spent many hours praying together. I'm not sure if that's why God chose these two guys for me to see. They were significant to me in my spiritual life. Everyone I saw had been influential in shaping my life in some way. A woman who died giving birth said, I recognized my grandmother and a girl that I had known when I was in school and many other relatives and friends. It was a very happy occasion. I felt they had come to guide me and protect me. Okay, now this is interesting because Dr. Mary Neal said the same thing to me. She said that her welcoming committee was there to love her and guide her on her journey and protect her. And I always ask, protect you from what? And she said, I don't know. I just intuitively knew they were there to protect me. So a little word of warning. One of the things I've realized is that, you know, near-death experiencers are having an experience, but it's a very small view of a vast world. So not any one has a complete picture of the whole. And not, a lot of it's good, but not everything is good. It's kind of like, Jesus, I was going to say, Jesus talked about this, so we're going to be together. He said to his friends, there's more than enough room. I'm going to prepare a place for you. When everything is ready, I'll come to get you, so you'll always be with me where I go. But in this place, you know, they're just getting a glimpse of this vast world. And not all of it's good. It's kind of like you see this view of Mount Rushmore, and we all know that view, but there's another side of Mount Rushmore. And it's not all pretty, is it? So, what you realize in that is that these people are seeing a small view of this, and a commonality is they come in their experience to a border or a boundary they knew they couldn't cross and still come back to earth. And I think that's very key, because these people are not actually crossing over into either eternal life or eternal death. They're just seeing a peek of the reality of what's to come. But interestingly, this welcoming committee that's there to guide them and protect them, Jesus talked about in Luke 16. He said, use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends. Then when your earthly possessions are gone, they will welcome you to an eternal home. This is this welcoming committee he was talking about that's there to greet so many of them as they come in. So just imagine what relationship is going to be like on the other side. We're still going to be ourselves. We still have our memories from the past. We even have our sense of humor. Hopefully you're actually going to be funny there. We know each other. We have history together. We hug. We laugh. We sing. It's life. Okay? Listen as some of the people I've interviewed describe relationships.
Many people who've had near-death experience say that they have this welcoming committee, they call it, of friends or relatives mainly who have died already, and they come and they greet them. And just imagine what that might be like.
My family appeared. One of them put their hand out, and I knew it was my grandmother.
And when I looked up, there's my family. Everybody that had been related to me, a part of my family, came to greet me in. My grandmother Mary was out front. She was bright, you know, she had a big smile and pure joy.
I was immediately greeted by a group of people, spirits, beings. They were absolutely exploding with a
I had known and loved in life. And they were all perfect in every way, fully recognizable as themselves.
Pero me fijé, pero miré para el derechito, miré a mi mamá y a mi tío.
I'm looking at this man who I recognized by my heart. But I knew that that was Paul. He's my great-grandfather. Now, Paul was standing next to Mom. I knew her as an old woman when I was a kid. When she was in heaven, she looked to be in her 30s. This was my family.
On this right side of me, where all these animals coming in, you'll be surprised when you get there and your pet's there to greet you in.
It's the number one question I get. Will my pet be in heaven? I'm like, come on, guys, you got to learn to love people too. You know, so what people commonly say is that love is the point. It's what it's all about. And in this place, they then encounter this God of light who is a love that is beyond anything they've ever experienced in this life. And in this God's presence, many get a life review. Now, time actually works differently on the other side as well. It's interesting, it's what Peter, one of Jesus' disciples, says in 2 Peter 3:8, when he says to the Lord, 1,000 years is like a day, and a day is like 1,000 years. I've had Indian ears say almost the same thing. Like, I don't know if it was a second or days. Time worked differently on the other side. And in the book, Imagine Heaven, I talk about how even two-dimensional time, we have one-dimensional time, even two-dimensional time would have that effect. That at every point on our timeline, there would be another timeline going infinitely another way, where you would have all the time you need before moving on to another of our timeline points. And they talk about this. So they're able to re-experience their lives. Now, one of the fascinating things that also convinced me that this is real, not only are there verifiable observations that connect these experiences to our world, but when people blind from birth have a near-death experience, they can see. And they see and report the same things as sighted people. And some of the things they reported, they would never have heard on Earth. And when they come back to Earth, they're still blind. So Vicky is one of the ones that I report on in Imagine Heaven. She was 22 when she died in a car accident. She had been blind from birth. She at first is having a hard time adjusting to this new perception that is sight. She recognizes finally that that's her body down on the operating table because of her long hair and her orange blossom wedding ring. And then she travels and she goes through this vortex, this tunnel, and comes out to this exquisite looking garden onto grass. And here's what she says, and listen to how she describes the light. That's what I think is really important here. She says, she came out into grass and trees and flowers and a vast number of people that surrounded her in this place of tremendous light. And the light, Vicky said, was something you could feel as well as see. Even the people that I saw there were bright. Everything there was made of light, and I was made of light, and the light conveyed love. There was love everywhere. It was like love came out of the grass, and love came out of the birds, and love came out of the trees. It was incredible, really beautiful, and I was overwhelmed by that experience because I couldn't imagine what light was like. It's still a very emotional thing to think about. All right, now think about this, because I've interviewed other blind people that I report on in my books, like Brad, who was an 8-year-old kid, says the same thing about this light that he experiences in heaven, coming out of everything, and it's palpable. It's light that is also love and life coming out of everything. Now, a blind person on earth would hear that light shines on things and would have felt the heat of the sun, right? They would have never heard that light shines out of things. And yet, they're reporting exactly what the scriptures say in Revelation 21, where John sees a vision of heaven and it says, the city had no need of sun or moon, for the glory of God illuminates the city, and the Lamb, Jesus, is its light, and the nations will walk in that light. And if you think about it, you know, the New Testament tells us God is love. Jesus said, I'm the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but have the light of life. So life and love and light all together, infusing and giving life to everything. Imagine the experience, not only of nature, but relationship in that kind of life and love. And this also started to convince me, because why would blind people and sighted people having a near-death experience? Most Christians who read the Bible don't know this, that there's no sun or moon in heaven. The glory of God is its light. And yet they consistently report this all around the globe. Now, Vicki, after seeing these people, she sees Debbie and Diane, two of her childhood friends, and there's this great reunion. And like Dale had said, they're all about age 30, seemingly, which I like. 29, 30 is a good year for me. I'm looking forward to that again. And then she turns, because there's a light brighter than all of them, and they're brighter than the sun, like 1,000 times, they commonly say, is Jesus. And she sees him, and she knows who he is, and she runs to him. She recognizes him. She can feel his hug. She can feel his beard on her face. He's real. And yet she reports light coming out of his beard. They have a conversation, but the conversation is thought to thought, heart to heart. It's pure communication. Not so much with words, though you can use words. And this too is a commonality. And then he gives her a life review. Now this life review is literally, they panoramically review their lives, but the emphasis is usually on relationship. And they experience not only what they were thinking and feeling in every vignette of life, but also what the other people were thinking and feeling. And they consistently coming back saying two things. God is love, and how we love or treat one another is what matters most. So I want you to listen as a couple of people describe this to you. And by the way, you know, I think this life review is not the judgment. People always ask me that. In Scripture, that comes at the end of all human history. I think what this is just really what Jesus talked about. Oh, by the way, you know, Vicki talked about the people exuding this light. Jesus said, then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. And it's not like we're always like that. Sometimes we're just normal. Like Marv Besteman told me, yeah, he was wearing like his normal golf outfit, just like he would take his wife out to. And I write more about the when and the why of that exchange of this light and love of God. It happens periodically, but not all the time. But Jesus also said there's nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. And then Paul said, judge nothing before the appointed time. Wait till the Lord comes. He will bring to light what is hidden in darkness and expose the motives of the heart. At that time, each will receive their praise from God. And I want you to know something, because people always are afraid of the life review. You know, because I've got a lot of things I'm not really excited to sit there with God and watch, right? I'm sure you are too. But here's the thing you got to understand. What God has done for all humanity is to make a way to forgive all of that and actually praise and reward us for every little act of kindness, every little thing done to please him and done to serve humanity. And think about that. But here's the thing. No matter what we've done, God is the God of forgiveness. He's the God of the second, third, fourth, fifth, keep going chance. And that's exactly what he did for us through Jesus. But if we reject him, in other words, if we say, I'm good, I don't need you, God, he'll give us what we want. And that is hell. And by the way, there are many good near-death experiences, but there are many bad near-death experiences as well. We can't take the good and leave out the bad. In one study done, about 23% of people who came forward reporting near-death experiences reported hellish or troubling near-death experiences. One guy that I interviewed, who's become a good friend, Howard Storm, was an atheist and a tenured college professor. When he was doing an art tour through Paris, and his duodenum ruptured, and you have about 5 hours before you die. And it was a Saturday. They couldn't find a surgeon. After 8 hours, he died. Now, he thought when you die, it's just unplug the computer, screen goes blank, nothing. But what he said is, suddenly he found himself standing up by the bed and feeling wonderful. He said, I felt like Superman. I felt great. He said, I had all these senses, and he didn't even know he was dead. He didn't realize it. And then this group of people comes in the hallway of the hospital, and they're very nice. So he seems to have the same nice welcoming committee of people who say, Howard, come with us. And he thinks it's the hospital staff. He said, I need help. I need surgery. I said, oh, we know all about you. We've been waiting for you. Don't you want to get better? Come with us. Come with us. And so he does come with them. Now, pause for 1 second, because I think this is really critical. Had Howard been resuscitated at that point, he could have interpreted his near-death experience any way he wanted, right? Hey, atheists, go to heaven. It all is good. It all feels good, right? Nice people. I felt great. But that's not what happened. These people deceived him and led him to a place that he said was blacker than black. It's exactly what Jesus described as the outer darkness, where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. He tried to get away from them when he realized they were deceiving him. They turned on him and just started to maul him. And you can read the full story and imagine heaven. It's pretty brutal. He's said this to me many times, because I've heard him talk about it. He said, they did things to me that I can't talk about. And I came back with PTSD, because it was real. So imagine the worst prison scene in the world, and then multiply. So in this place, though, of darkness as he is being devoured, literally, he hears inside. He remembers a song when he went to church. A neighbor took him to church. Jesus loves me. That's all he could remember. And in his desperation, in this place, he cries out, Jesus save me. Even though he didn't believe it. He's like, if there even is one. And he said, into this darkness comes this pinpoint of light, brighter and brighter, suddenly brighter than the sun. Arms reach out, pick him up, take him out of there. He said as he was bawling like a baby. And like a parent with a long-lost child, just rubbing his back. And then there before the angels, as Jesus is holding him, he gets a life review. So I want you to listen to this tenured atheist college professor who has this life review and what he says about it. And then Dr. Mary Neal, who also talks about her life review and the positive ripple effect of the impact that we can have. Watch.
Howard, tell us about this life review.
There was a number of angels, I call them angels, that have been recording my entire life while I went to Jesus, wanted them to play out in chronological order the scenes of my life. And the entire emphasis was on my interaction with persecutions I held with my mother and father, my sisters, my school and friends.
So you just saw it, or
We saw it, felt it, experienced it. It was really interesting. The whole emphasis was on people. As a matter of fact, there were some instances where I had one promotions, honors, awards, and they skipped them. And I said to Jesus, you skipped the most important thing in my life. This is what I live for, to get this award, Kentucky Artist of the Year. Big banquet in my honor, and a big cash prize and everything. That's not important. What I want you to see is how you turn this. So what I learned in my life review is that the relationship with my father, I had participated in the breakdown of that relationship as much as he did. He was not a good father to me, and I resented it, and I was angry at him, so I did everything I could, subconsciously, sometimes consciously, as rebellious and as cold-hearted towards him as possible, which only aggravated him more and made him more of a hostile father. So the things that I'd seen in my life where I was the victim and everybody else was the bad guy, I came to find out it was a two-way street. We were both. As my life progressed, my adolescence into my adulthood, sister was in bed crying, and I got up on my own night and went into her arms. She was so filled with joy and died. Those were rare. Just seeing people as objects in order to move around the room or, to shift further my goals in life.
You go through a life review and it was nothing like I would have imagined. My life was laid bare for all its good and bad. And one of the things we did was look at many, many, many events throughout my life that I would have otherwise called terrible or horrible or sad or bad or tragic. And instead of looking at an event in isolation or looking at how it impacted me and my little world, I had the most remarkable experience seeing the ripple effects of the event when seen 25, 30, 35 times repeated.
And realizing that every little action of kindness ripples through humanity. And we don't see that, but one day God will show us and God will reward us. That's what he wants to do. Now think about it. What would cause a tenured college professor to come back from this near-death experience and 2 years later leave his tenured professorship and become a Christian pastor? His wife thought he was crazy. She was still an atheist. She left him. It's because it's real. And God is real. And God cares about every single person more than we can possibly imagine. And, some people will ask me, especially if they've got a Christian background, like, well, why would these people who don't believe in God see God? Well, Revelation 1:7 says that every eye will see him. Even those who nailed him to the cross, even those who pierced him will see him. And, Paul, who, again, wrote a big chunk of the New Testament, did not believe. He thought Jesus was definitely not the Messiah when he's going along the road and approaching Damascus on a mission to arrest Jesus' followers and have them killed even. And he said a light from heaven suddenly shone down around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice saying, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" "Who are you, Lord?" Saul asked, and the voice replied, "I'm Jesus, the one you're persecuting." There's the same God of light who appeared to Saul and is appearing to people all over the world because he is the God of all nations. He loves all people from all nations. What he did through Jesus 2,000 years ago, what we celebrate at Christmas and at Easter, he did for every person of every nation, that any heart who wants to turn back to him can be forgiven and know that they are right with God and will be forever with him in this incredible place. In Genesis 12, the very beginning of the Bible, God says to Abraham, "Leave your country, your relatives, your family, go to the land I'll show you. I will make you a great nation, and all families on earth will be blessed through you." See, the God of the Bible has always been the God of all nations. And that's what we are even seeing near-death experiencers testify to today. Like I said, I've interviewed recently 70 people all over the world. And I want you to hear from a few of them as we wrap up here. Heidi grew up Jewish, and her father was an atheist and a very abusive man. But she always believed in God, and she prayed every night. She prayed to God. And then at 16, she has a horse riding accident and had a near-death experience. Karina grew up in Colombia, also had a very difficult background. Her parents actually abandoned her at age 16. She ended up just trying to find love in every way possible, gets pregnant, has an abortion, just a tough life. And then in COVID, she has a near-death experience. Her pacemaker that she had failed, and she finds herself rising up above her husband's head and said, "I suddenly realized, oh my gosh, it's real. God is real, this is real." And she starts praying the Our Father that she learned in growing up as a Catholic, and praying for forgiveness. And she found herself going toward what she knew was a hellish place, but rescue. And listen to what she says about the God she describes. And then Swidik was actually in Rwanda. He's a Muslim imam, or he was. And his father was a Hutu, his mother was a Tutsi. So if you remember the genocide, it divided their family at age 8. He ended up on the streets because of it, dealing drugs, doing drugs, just trying to survive. But later in life, he became an imam in the Muslim faith himself. His mother worshiped the goddess Bako, an African goddess there. He gets blood cancer. His mom tries to get all the things the goddess Bako could do. The father tries to get all the Muslim things to do to heal. Nothing happens, and he's dying of blood cancer. He's on palliative care. The mother, in desperation, goes to the Anglican church and asks if they would pray to Jesus because she heard sometimes Jesus heals. And Swidik dies. Listen, though, what he experiences, and he comes to actually at his burial. And then I interviewed Santosh, who was a manufacturing engineer, grew up in India. The Sanskrit, Hindu scriptures was all he knew. And yet, when he died, he hears code blue. He's up above his body. He said, this divine light comes to me. I knew this was a divine light with ultimate authority. He said, I fell in love with that light. And the light takes him to a place, and he describes what you'll hear is this city. But he's not describing what he found in the Hindu scriptures. Listen to what these people describe.
My dad had a mantra: there is no God, there is no heaven, there is no hell. Jesus Christ is the biggest hoax ever perpetrated on mankind. My heart hit my chest. I was about 30, 40 feet from him. I realized there was a person standing right there. And he moved forward, and I looked at him, and he looked at me, and I said, oh, Jesus. I was
how I can go to this narrow door. This next time when you see me, Lord, I want to go to the narrow door.
So just think about how wild this is. I mean, these are just a few of the 70 people I've interviewed. You can read their full stories in Imagine the God of Heaven. But what would cause a Jewish girl who only grew up hearing that there is no God, Jesus Christ is the biggest hoax ever perpetrated on mankind, to come back from a near-death experience saying she experienced God as Jesus, and she knew this was the God who had always been with her? And then why would a Rwandan imam come back saying that Jesus had rescued him, and that and afterwards he ended up becoming an Anglican pastor and has had 7 attempts on his life? Because you can't convert from Islam to Christianity. And yet he won't shut up about Jesus. How do you explain that? Or how do you explain a Hindu manufacturing engineer describing perfectly the holy city of God, just like in Revelation 21, where John describes it, saying, he took me in the spirit to a great high mountain. He showed me the holy city. It shone with the glory of God. The city wall was broad and high, just like Santosh talked about, with 12 gates guarded by 12 angels, just like Santosh talked about. It was square, as wide as it was long. Santosh said the same thing. And yet he had never, ever read the Bible. And there God gives him kind of like a parable, which sometimes I find he does. These gates are closed, but there's a very narrow gate open to him. And he asks the Lord, how do I go through it? He comes back, he gets resuscitated, and he is seeking. And it's interesting because the scripture says, if you seek me with all your heart, you'll find me. And he was, every day praying, God, I want to know you. Who are you? You weren't like the gods of the Hindu scriptures I knew. And he kept praying. And then his daughter is invited to sing at a church on Easter because she was a choral major. Her friend invited her. Santosh goes to hear her. And he walks in and feels the same loving presence that he felt in God's presence. And this is what the message was on that day. Matthew 7, you can enter God's kingdom only through the narrow gate. And then the pastor talked about John 10, where Jesus says, I tell you the truth, I am the gate for the sheep. Yes, I am the gate. Those who come in through me will be saved. And Santosh felt like, oh my gosh, he's speaking just to me. And he told me, I went home and I started reading the Bible, and I said, he said, everything I experienced was in this book. Now, I think the takeaway from all of this is that all the beauty and all the love and all the adventure and all the excitement of earth is just a taste. But God created it all, and he created you and he created me, and it's not meant to end. In the end, it's all about love. And all the good things that are on this earth, God gave us because he loves us. And as we seek to love God and love one another, this life doesn't end. And all the wonders and all the beauty, they go on. So I hope that gives you hope as we enter into this Christmas season. And as you go outdoors, think about that. And thank the one who gave it to us. Thank you.
John, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And let's open up the questions.
Love to hear y'all's thoughts. Some pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah.
So, these are people that actually have died and share their stories when they're resuscitated. How about all the people that are facing natural deaths that have visitors from the other side? How do those two things tie together?
That's Jan's specialty. Yeah, you know, I don't know fully. But we do live on. I think, you know, there is in the Old Testament, God tells us not to try to contact the dead. And I think there's a reason for that, and we might disagree on it. I have interviewed people who, in thinking they were contacting the dead, found that they were being deceived by deceiving spirits. So I think that's possible. However, I think sometimes God does send people back. And sometimes in dreams, I know when my dad died, I had a very vivid dream shortly after that. And I was sitting where we used to go fishing on the bank, and I sat down next to him, and we're just talking about life, and all of a sudden I realized, wait a second, you're dead. What? And it was very real, and then it was very vivid, and then I woke up. Others have had people visit them just to kind of assure them that I think that they're okay. I think God does probably sometimes send people just to assure us or to minister to us. So that's about all I know.
It was interesting. So my mom passed away from lung cancer like 2 years. About 5 months before she passed, my caregiver. She had a visitor, and so I was asking questions. So, you know him and so forth. And I was like, oh, it looks like Jackson.
Wait,
he came to visit her.
And he was dead?
This is a strange one. So she's like, I'm not saying it was Jackson. He just wore, he had normal thing on. He wore a ball cap backwards, and well, how old was he? 31. I mean, she said it definitively. It wasn't like, oh, he's about 30. No, 31. Who was it? I don't know. He looked kind of Jackson. So when I shared that story after she passed, my brother got really upset about it. Because he's like, does that mean my son's going to die at 31? Like, no, she didn't even say for sure it was Jackson. She said it looked like Jackson. He goes, yeah, but he wears his ball cap backwards all the time, and guess what his baseball number is? 31. So anyway, that was kind of freakish, but she had 2 other things. Her mom, about a week before she passed, her mom came to visit, and then I asked what they talked about. In all 3 cases, they didn't have verbal communication, they just knew. So it's telepathic, whatever it is.
It is, it's thought to thought, but it's more than that.
And she was just so pleased to see that her mom looked so happy and beautiful.
Yeah.
Things that she worried about with herself. And that was really the takeaway there. And then 2 days before she passed, a neighbor lady that they had known each other for a long, long time had passed like a few days before that. And I'm sleeping in the living room outside because I know mom's close to death and I need to be there in case she stirs. And I'm sitting there thinking about the neighbor. And when I ask her when she wakes up, and she didn't like talking about it, but I kept going because I could tell her something there. She's like, oh, I helped get in that house. What do you mean? She was, I packed up her house for her. Well, that's interesting. How did you know what to do? She's like, she's just sitting in the corner. And she just packed things up for her. So it's like mom was getting ready to go, but also preparing Annette, who's already gone, cleaning up what was left behind, and there was just this, she didn't say there was this feeling of love, but there was just this peace. And she just good.
Well, those are actually called deathbed visions. They're very common. And if you talk to hospice workers and nurses, doctors especially, they'll tell you it's pretty common that it's kind of like the veil gets thin and they are beginning to just welcome them over. Yeah.
Berlin, in my opinion, dualistic world is mostly physical, but there's also the spiritual element.
There is.
And then you go to the other side, but there's mostly spiritual, but there's also the physical component to it. And I have other people that have shared stories with me, and the one with the neighbor lady, I'm sitting there thinking about him. So like I'm sensing the same thing. Not getting the vision like she
Right.
That freaks me out because I became part of that.
Kind of have a premonition. Yeah.
Did any of the folks you interviewed, did they describe people doing something, doing some kind of work? Because I have this perception in heaven that we'll be doing a lot of the same things we do here. Obviously, everything will be renewed, won't be sin.
We still have to work.
Won't need evangelists or medical doctors anymore, but I wondered if they described anything like that.
Yeah. Actually, Dr. Mary Neal said as she was looking into this archway, the same archway tunnel through this big wall that Santosh was describing and Captain Dale Black described. That's what's crazy. Is how they all are describing the same place, and I'm here, and they don't know each other when I'm interviewing them. Anyway, she said she looked through, and it was like this city bustling with life. She said they were very busy. I don't know what they're busy about, but it was like everybody was excited about something and busy about something. And yes, I've heard this many times, and I think it's, you know, the way I like to think about it is, have you ever been in the zone? You know, where you're creating something or you're working on something and you're just so into it that you lose track of time. Time is your enemy because you're creating, you're loving what you're doing. And I think we're going to have work, we're going to have assignments, but it's going to be more like that. It's not going to be the drudgery where time is an enemy here. And, yeah.
Genesis 3 will be gone.
Exactly.
I do wonder though, John, what you and I are going to do because people will not need to hear about near-death experience.
We'll have to find a new line of work.
Yeah.
They will be lawyers.
Oh God, please
I do
no.
have one question.
Yeah.
I've heard this in other presentations about industries. There seems to be a couple where there's a question, a direct question. I think it was actually Howard asked this, or I think he asked Christ from God. I can't remember exactly who he asked to. What is the right religion? Do you remember that question? Howard Stormian asking that question?
Yeah, we didn't go over that in the interview I did with him, but I think I remember him in another interview talking about that.
I just found it was interesting that what I remember it being was whatever religion brings you closer to God. And I don't know if that's true or not. Admittedly, I found it interesting because, like, obviously as Christians, I think everyone in this room is a Christian. I don't know. It was just fascinating the depth of questions that are asked over all these interviews you've had. And the level of objective truth you hear in all of these is astounding.
Well, and that's part of what I'm trying to show in Imagine the God of Heaven. But I think sometimes Christian theology misses the point in thinking that God loves Christians somehow more than other people. And that actually is the problem the Pharisees had, who, by the way, crucified Jesus in the name of God. Like trying to protect God's glory, they crucified Jesus because they weren't actually understanding and open to what God has been doing throughout history. And that's why, you know, what I'm trying to trace through Imagine the God of Heaven is showing that 500 times in the Bible, God is speaking to the nations. Find another scripture where their deity is concerned about all the nations, not just this local area or local tribe. And so what he's always been doing is providing a way for all of his children to come back home. And I think that's exactly what he did through Jesus. And I think he foretold it, and I go through and Imagine the God of Heaven. What convinced me was not near-death experiences, but actually looking at what God said, here's what I'm going to do so you'll know it's me, and then he did it in verifiable history. And I go into all that in the book as well. Because what I'm trying to show is these two things, what people are saying all over the globe about this God they're experiencing, and what God's been revealing throughout history about who he is and what he's about. They don't clash, they actually come together. Now in some cases that may cause tension in me for a long time. It took me 35 plus years of study to write this book because I had a lot of questions. But I think it does actually harmonize. And I think it shows that God is, just like Santosh said, he's a God of grace and love and mercy. But he does know our wrongs and he takes them into account, but he has paid for them. We don't have to pay for them. Yeah.
One other question. Was there anything in your interviews that were contrary to Scripture? Did someone describe something or said something that was...
Yeah, so let me say something I think is really important on this, and that's why the 2D, 3D analogy, right? So just like if we were experiencing a three-dimensional world of color and then trying to describe it in two-dimensional black and white terms, there'd be things that are just near impossible because we don't even have words, right? So that means it would have to be, well, it's like, or it's like, and it would be an interpretation. And that's got to be true for near-death experiencers as well. So an important thing to remember is they are all interpreting an experience, all right? And I often say, I don't believe still everything every near-death experiencer says. I don't. I'm still skeptical. In nature, I just am. And I'm always kind of like, if it's a one-off, I'm like, maybe, I don't know, you know? And I'm looking for multiple correlations, and then I'm trying to see, okay, well, and then because of what I know that God's revealed about himself through history, how does that all correlate? That's what I write about. That's what I'm interested in. So yes, absolutely. And that's why I point out, like, for instance, if someone has what I would call a very shallow near-death experience, like when you look at the 40 commonalities or so that I've traced, let's say someone dies, they leave their body, they're up above, they feel great, and then they come back to their body. All right? Well, you can interpret that in any worldview you want it, right? And people do. So I think it's only as you look at all the data points, thousands of data points, that then it starts to harmonize. But there's still questions. And yeah, there are some things that Jan and I were just even talking about, you know, some of them talking about they felt like when they were there in heaven, they not only were they home, but like they had been there before, like they had pre-existed. And you know, that caused me a lot of like, I don't know, how does that fit with the Bible? But then if you think about it too, you know, God said to Jeremiah the prophet, before I formed you in your mother's womb, I knew you. All right, so if Jeremiah was a known entity before he was ever human in this life, what does that mean? And what does it mean known in eternal time, which we don't even understand? And so maybe what they're experiencing is the fact that they were always connected in God's mind. God is eternal. But I don't know. So there are still questions like that I ponder. And
something to look forward to.
Yeah, yeah. There are mysteries for sure. Yeah. Any other questions? I know we've gone.
So how many people report literally seeing God? Jesus, or something like the one lady that was Jewish.
48%.
Notice she said, "Oh, that's who was sitting with me at my bedside."
Yeah. So 48% of people that, you know, in looking at Dr. Long's data, which is the most complete, experienced this light and love of God, you know, or Jesus as God. They know this is God. So quite a few. That's quite a few.
That is a high percentage.
It is.
Is he in a physical form, and is he a complete form? Or?
No, not always. So sometimes they just experience this light and love, but they know this is a divine being. And then there's communication. And sometimes, and they don't necessarily know who it is, but they know this is God, right? So sometimes that's the case. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Did anybody explain why God put us on this earth to go through so many huge ups and downs? Because that's my first question to God is, you know, why? Why did I have to go through all this suffering? Truly, I mean, and good things, like my daughter.
A blessing.
Yeah. But you know what I mean?
Well, at least you didn't say all this suffering and point to you.
Yeah. It would have been over there's some of that. But I mean, just in general, I mean, why couldn't we have just stayed up there with God the whole time and loved
Wouldn't
God?
appreciate him.
I would have.
Well,
Nobody explained that.
Yeah, I mean, any explanation will be a theory, okay? But I do talk about that in Imagine Heaven in this chapter on suffering.
Are you selling the book here?
I'm not.
Do you have your book?
I don't have it. I have it so you can look at it, but they're in
Buy it
there.
on Amazon or Audible.
But you
Yeah,
can't, okay.
it's
You
pretty
can't
much
find it.
anywhere books can be sold. I should have bought them. But so I believe there is a reason, and my reason is kind of theological and philosophical, but I'll try to explain it, and you can read it and it will make more sense. But so love is the point, and every near-death experiencer and Moses and Jesus said that. Love God, love people, you fulfill all the commandments in the Bible. That's Jesus, right? And near-death experiencers consistently say the same thing. It's amazing. But love requires free will. So if I fall in love with someone, I can give them lots of gifts and hope they'll fall in love with me, but how do I know they don't just like the goodies? And they really love me, for me. So you can't buy love. And you can't coerce or force love. I mean, even if I put a gun to someone's head and said, love me, we all know they might parrot it out of fear, but that's not love. Love has to be free. So God created us in this world free for the purpose of love. For a time. Now, here's why for a time. And why I think he also allows us to have a taste of life without the source of love. So God is somewhat removed from this life, but not completely. And he lets us live rejecting God and his will and ways, so that we also have a little taste of what hell is like. Because I believe hell, especially after studying near-death experiencers, what C.S. Lewis, one of my favorite authors, said, is that he believes the gates of hell are locked from the inside. And I've had near-death experiencers say almost the same thing. Like, God doesn't put people in hell. They choose it. In other words, it's the only place where God says, okay, I won't go there. I won't rule, I'll let you, the free will creature, rule. So, think about this. There are also creatures called angels. Humans don't become angels. Angels are, I like to think of them like another species. God's created millions of species on this earth, but there are also species he's created in the world to come. And angels also apparently have a free will, if you believe the Bible, because a third of them rebel. And Jesus says that hell was created for the angels, not for humans. So hell is an eternal place, and the only place where God lets a free will creature who wants nothing to do with God have what they want. But then there's no life, and no love, and no sense of life, and it's just, as Howard Storm, the atheist professor, told me, he said, it's the free will creature, dominate or be dominated. Angel and human, dominate or be dominated. And so, all that to say, I think that God is giving us a temporal experience of, we live in the knowledge of good and evil, right? Like Genesis says, for a time, so that we will choose good, so that we will realize what's missing in this life is God and his will, and that we will choose to love God, and that will be a free will choice. And then when our choice is eternal lives, we'll still look back on earth and remember what it's like when God's will and ways and God's love didn't prevail, and as a result we will freely choose to follow the ways of love, but not be coerced. That's my theory. I might be wrong, but
that's good. I like it.
Thank you.
Let's do one last question. Any final questions? We're good. Well, again, John, thanks so much for coming.
Hey, thank you.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
To close out, just to highlight what's coming next year, we've got a good slate of speakers. Just to highlight them again, we've got Jamie Tigan, who will be coming here in March. She's done a phenomenal job in the leadership of Wild Sheep Foundation. Really going to be pretty cool experience. She's actually going to be cooking up for us. So she'll be cooking up wild game in the sense of wild sheep, some elk, So it'll be a pretty unique one, more of a culinary experience. We'll have Wayne Endicott, kind of a similar flavor to John. He's actually an evangelist in addition to being one of the best bow hunting shop owners in the country out of Portland, Oregon. Best friends with Cam Haynes, one of the most prolific bow hunters in the country. Just a world of knowledge in that world of bow hunting. Michael Pitts coming to us from Georgia, owns a bow shop there as well, but also a prolific hunter. Also in leadership with a number of different outdoor businesses, so he should be a pretty wild one coming from more of a business perspective in the outdoor industry. Rob Fordyce, one of the most prolific fishing captains in the entire country, based out of Alabama, Florida, heavy involved in tournaments and fly fishing for tarpon, permit, bonefish, that kind of thing. TV show host. I think he was ranked like top 30 captains in the world in the fishing world. So that would be a wild one. Ryan Waters, one of the most prolific photographers in the alpine world, so mountaineering, that kind of thing, constantly going all over the world, especially southwestern Asia, hiking all different sorts of Himalayan mountains, some pretty wild stories coming from him. And then finally, Mark Conley, starting to get into the equine world. So Mark's actually a trainer, had come from the Southern California region, running a training facility for all different types of horses. Now runs one in Lexington, Kentucky. So one of the most prolific trainers in that world. We haven't done that yet, so from popular demand, thought it'd be cool to go in that direction. So more of a showcase of what's coming next year. We also have our first fundraising event. We're going to have Chris Fowler, the ESPN anchor from Monday Night Football, college football, Wimbledon. He'll be coming. We're still negotiating dates, so kind of nailing that down. But if you guys have an interest in becoming a sponsor or getting involved, we'd love to discuss this further with you. And then again, just the final dates, times, and everything listed here as well. So just really appreciate you guys coming. Really enjoyed it. And thanks for arguing through the rain and the elements to get here, including John. But thank you so much for everything. And John, thanks for coming. You're welcome. Awesome. Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you.